There comes a point in life where you look around and realize no one is coming to save you. No guidance, no reassurance, no emotional backup. That moment feels terrifying, but psychologically, it is also the most powerful turning point of your life. If you're standing completely alone right now, this isn't the end of your story. It's the exact place where strong, self-made individuals are born. Loneliness is often misunderstood as a personal failure, as if being alone means something is wrong with you. Psychologically, that belief is inaccurate. Loneliness is not a character flaw. It is a phase of transition where old emotional patterns dissolve before new ones are formed. When familiar support systems disappear, the mind enters uncertainty, and uncertainty feels threatening. But threat does not equal danger. It simply signals change. The discomfort you feel is not proof of weakness. It is evidence that your identity is shifting. Most people confuse loneliness with abandonment. In reality, loneliness often appears when your inner growth outpaces your environment. The people, routines, or roles that once defined you can no longer keep up with who you are becoming. This creates emotional distance, even if nothing dramatic has happened externally. Psychologically, this is similar to shedding an old skin. The brain resists this because familiarity feels safe, even when it is limiting. So the mind labels the experience as pain rather than progress. When you're alone, you are forced to confront yourself without distraction. This is where many people panic. Without constant interaction, validation, or noise, suppressed emotions surface. Unprocessed grief, anger, self-doubt, and unmet needs begin demanding attention. Many individuals immediately try to escape this phase through unhealthy attachments, overworking, or numbing behaviors. But avoidance prolongs the transition. Loneliness exists to make you aware of what you've been running from internally. From a psychological standpoint, solitude strengthens emotional autonomy. You begin learning how to self-soothe instead of relying on others to regulate your emotions. This is a critical developmental step that many adults never fully complete. When someone has always had external emotional support, their nervous system depends on others for stability. Loneliness disrupts this dependency and teaches the brain resilience through self-regulation, reflection, and emotional endurance. Another reason loneliness feels unbearable is because it challenges identity. When you're not someone's priority, partner, helper, or supporter, you're left asking, who am I without these roles? That question is uncomfortable but necessary. Identity built only on relationships is fragile. Loneliness strips identity down to its core, forcing you to recognize your values, limits, and unmet desires. This internal clarity does not develop in constant companionship. Loneliness also slows life down, and the human mind resists stillness. In silence, patterns become visible. You start noticing which relationships drained you, which compromises cost you self-respect, and which habits were survival mechanisms rather than choices. This awareness can feel heavy, but it is cognitively empowering. Insight precedes change, and change requires a pause. Emotionally mature individuals understand that loneliness is temporary but transformative. It is a psychological corridor between who you were and who you are becoming. The discomfort exists because the old identity no longer fits, but the new one has not fully formed yet. The brain is recalibrating, learning how to operate without external reassurance, adjusting expectations, and redefining emotional boundaries. Self-responsibility begins the moment you accept that no one else is obligated to fix your life, regulate your emotions, or rescue you from discomfort. Psychologically, this realization is unsettling because the human brain is wired for attachment and shared survival. From early development, Safety is associated with caregivers and external reassurance. When that reassurance is removed in adulthood, the nervous system initially responds with anxiety. But this anxiety is not a sign of incapability. It is the brain adjusting to autonomy. Many people confuse self-responsibility with self-blame. They are not the same. Self-blame attacks the self and reinforces helplessness, while self-responsibility empowers action. Taking responsibility does not mean everything that happened to you was your fault. It means recognizing that your response to what happened is within your control. This shift is crucial because control restores psychological stability. When the mind believes it has agency, stress becomes manageable instead of overwhelming. Standing alone exposes how often we unconsciously outsource responsibility. We expect others to motivate us, validate us, calm us down, or give direction. When those expectations are not met, frustration grows. Self-responsibility interrupts this pattern. It asks you to become the person you were waiting for. Instead of asking who will support you, you ask how you can support yourself. This internal shift changes behavior, decision-making, and emotional resilience. Emotionally, self-responsibility requires honesty. You must acknowledge your habits, patterns, and choices without distortion. Avoidance delays growth, but awareness accelerates it. When you take responsibility for your emotional triggers, you stop reacting impulsively and start responding intentionally. The brain moves from a survival mode driven by blame and defense to a problem-solving mode rooted in clarity and control. Self-responsibility also restructures boundaries. When you stop expecting others to meet your emotional needs, you become selective rather than desperate. You learn to say no without guilt and yes without fear. This is not emotional isolation, it is emotional maturity. You begin understanding that your feelings are signals, not commands, and your life improves when you respond to them thoughtfully. Another critical aspect of self-responsibility is consistency. Rising alone requires discipline even when motivation is absent. The brain builds confidence through repeated evidence of self-trust. Each time you keep a promise to yourself, your self-esteem strengthens. Each time you abandon yourself, it weakens. Responsibility creates reliability, and reliability builds inner security. Psychologically, people who rise alone develop a strong internal locus of control. They believe outcomes are influenced by their actions rather than external circumstances. This belief does not deny hardship, it contextualizes it. Challenges are no longer viewed as punishments, but as problems to be navigated. This mindset reduces helplessness and increases adaptability. Self-responsibility is not about becoming emotionally rigid or independent to the point of isolation. It is about becoming grounded. When you know you can handle your emotions, decisions, and setbacks, fear loses its grip. You stop chasing certainty from others and start creating stability within yourself. Motivation is often misunderstood as the driving force behind change, but psychologically, motivation is unstable. It is influenced by mood, energy levels, external validation, and immediate results. Emotional discipline, on the other hand, operates independently of how you feel in the moment. When you are standing alone, motivation becomes unreliable because there is no external reinforcement. Discipline is what remains when enthusiasm disappears and the mind starts resisting effort. Emotional discipline means regulating your internal state instead of being controlled by it. It is the ability to feel tired, discouraged, or emotionally drained and still choose behaviors that align with your long-term well-being. The brain naturally seeks comfort and avoidance, especially under stress. Without discipline, emotions dictate actions, leading to inconsistency. With discipline, emotions are acknowledged but not allowed to hijack decisions. Many people wait to feel ready before acting, but readiness is an emotional illusion. The mind creates hesitation as a form of self-protection, not because action is harmful, but because uncertainty feels threatening. Emotional discipline trains the brain to tolerate discomfort without interpreting it as danger. This tolerance is essential for growth, particularly in isolation, where emotional feedback is minimal. When you rely on motivation, progress becomes conditional. You work when you feel inspired and stop when you feel low. This creates a cycle of guilt and self-doubt. Emotional discipline breaks that cycle by establishing structure. Routine becomes a stabilizing force, giving the nervous system predictability. Predictability reduces anxiety and increases focus, even in emotionally challenging phases. Emotionally disciplined individuals do not suppress feelings, they manage them. They allow emotions to exist without turning them into excuses or identities. Feeling sad does not mean becoming passive. Feeling anxious does not mean avoiding responsibility. This separation between emotion and action strengthens psychological resilience. You begin to trust yourself because your behavior is no longer dependent on emotional highs or lows. Discipline also reframes pain. Instead of seeing discomfort as a signal to stop, it becomes information. Fatigue indicates a need for rest, not abandonment of purpose. Frustration signals a learning curve, not failure. This interpretation changes how the brain responds to stress. Stress becomes functional rather than paralyzing. In isolation, emotional discipline prevents self-sabotage. Without external accountability, it is easy to slip into avoidance, overthinking, or numbing behaviors. Discipline creates internal accountability. You become responsible for your own standards, your own recovery, and your own progress. This self-regulation is a critical psychological skill for long-term success. Over time, emotional discipline builds self-respect. Each disciplined action reinforces the belief that you are capable of showing up for yourself. Confidence is not built through positive thinking, it is built through evidence. The brain learns through experience, and disciplined behavior provides that evidence consistently. Solitude itself is neutral. It does not automatically damage or strengthen a person. What determines its impact is the mindset through which it is experienced. Psychologically, the brain assigns meaning to experiences before it reacts emotionally. If solitude is interpreted as rejection or failure, the nervous system responds with stress and defensiveness. If it is interpreted as a period of recalibration, the same experience becomes constructive rather than destructive. A fragile mindset views solitude as evidence of unworthiness. Thoughts such as, I am alone because I'm not enough, begin to dominate. These interpretations activate shame and self-criticism, which weaken emotional resilience. The brain becomes hyper-focused on perceived deficits rather than potential growth. Over time, this internal narrative erodes confidence and reinforces avoidance behaviors. A growth-oriented mindset approaches solitude differently. Instead of asking why no one is there, it asks what this phase is demanding internally. This shift moves the brain from emotional reactivity to cognitive processing. Solitude becomes a space for observation rather than judgment. You begin noticing patterns, triggers, and emotional needs without immediately labeling them as problems. This awareness is psychologically empowering. Mindset also determines how you use time in solitude. A passive mindset allows isolation to become stagnation. Hours are consumed by overthinking, comparison, or rumination. An intentional mindset turns the same hours into periods of restructuring. You begin building routines, learning new skills, and strengthening self-awareness. The difference is not in circumstances, but in interpretation and choice. Solitude exposes internal dialogue. When there is no one else to talk to, you listen to yourself more clearly. This can be uncomfortable because unresolved beliefs surface. A destructive mindset treats these thoughts as facts. A constructive mindset treats them as data. Thoughts are examined rather than believed. This cognitive distance prevents emotional spirals and promotes psychological flexibility. Another critical element of mindset is patience. Many people rush to escape solitude because they expect immediate emotional relief. But psychological growth does not operate on urgency. A patient mindset understands that internal change takes time. Instead of forcing outcomes, it focuses on consistency. This reduces frustration and builds emotional endurance. Mindset also influences how setbacks are processed. In solitude, mistakes feel heavier because there is no external reassurance. A rigid mindset interprets setbacks as proof of inadequacy. A resilient mindset views them as feedback. This interpretation protects self-esteem and maintains momentum. The brain learns that failure is not a threat to identity, but a signal for adjustment. When solitude is met with curiosity instead of fear, it becomes a training ground for independence. You learn to sit with discomfort without reacting impulsively. This skill transfers into every area of life. Relationships become healthier, decisions become clearer, and emotional regulation strengthens. Ultimately, solitude magnifies whatever mindset you bring into it. If your internal world is chaotic, solitude intensifies the chaos. If your internal world is structured, solitude strengthens that structure. The experience does not change, but its effect does, entirely shaped by how the mind frames it. Pain is an unavoidable psychological experience, yet most people treat it as something that must be escaped immediately. The brain naturally seeks relief, so avoidance feels instinctive. However, avoiding pain does not eliminate it, it displaces it. Suppressed emotional pain resurfaces through anxiety, irritability, numbness, or self-destructive patterns. When pain is avoided, it remains unresolved and continues influencing behavior unconsciously. Understanding pain requires slowing down instead of running away. This is difficult because pain demands attention, and attention feels overwhelming when emotions are intense. But psychologically, pain is information. It signals loss, boundary violations, unmet needs, or internal conflict. When you pause and examine it, you shift from emotional reactivity to awareness. Awareness creates distance, and distance reduces emotional intensity. Many people fear that acknowledging pain will make it stronger. In reality, the opposite occurs. The brain processes emotions through recognition, not suppression. When pain is named and validated internally, the nervous system begins to regulate itself. This does not mean indulging in suffering. It means allowing the experience to exist without resistance. Resistance amplifies distress, while acceptance stabilizes it. Pain also exposes patterns that comfort hides. During comfortable phases, problematic dynamics often go unnoticed. Pain interrupts autopilot behavior. It forces reflection and self-examination. You begin to notice why certain choices led to certain outcomes. This clarity transforms pain into insight. Insight is where power begins because it restores conscious choice. Avoidance often shows up as distraction. Overworking, constant entertainment, emotional detachment, or unhealthy attachments are common ways people numb pain. These strategies provide temporary relief but weaken emotional resilience. Each time pain is avoided, the brain learns that discomfort is intolerable. Over time, tolerance decreases, and even minor stresses feel overwhelming. When pain is understood, it strengthens emotional boundaries. You become more aware of what you can and cannot accept. You stop minimizing your emotional responses and start respecting them. This awareness changes how you interact with others. You become less reactive and more assertive. Pain clarifies limits that were previously blurred. Pain also deepens self-trust. When you face pain without collapsing, the brain registers competence. You learn that you can survive emotional distress without external rescue. This builds confidence that is grounded, not inflated. Power does not come from being unaffected, it comes from being able to remain functional while affected. Another psychological shift occurs when pain is understood rather than dramatized. Instead of becoming your identity, pain becomes an experience you are having. This distinction prevents victimhood. You stop defining yourself by what hurt you and start defining yourself by how you responded. This cognitive reframing preserves dignity and agency. Over time, processed pain reshapes priorities. What once felt important loses its grip. You become less driven by approval and more guided by alignment. Decisions become cleaner because they are informed by experience rather than fantasy. Pain teaches discernment, and discernment strengthens inner authority. External support provides comfort, but it can also delay psychological independence. When encouragement, guidance, or reassurance is always available, the brain does not fully develop self-reliance. This is not a flaw. It is a natural outcome of supported environments. Growth often begins when that support is removed, not because support is harmful, but because its absence forces adaptation. When external support disappears, the nervous system initially reacts with panic. The mind searches for familiar anchors, people, routines, or validation that previously provided stability. This reaction is rooted in survival psychology. Human beings are wired to rely on others. When that reliance is disrupted, anxiety emerges. But anxiety in this context signals adjustment, not incapacity. Without external guidance, decision-making becomes unavoidable. You are forced to think critically, assess risks, and tolerate uncertainty. This strengthens cognitive flexibility. The brain shifts from dependence to problem solving. Instead of asking what others think, you begin evaluating what aligns with your values and limits. This internal referencing system is essential for long-term growth. The absence of support also reveals internal strength that was previously untested. When someone else has always helped regulate stress or provide reassurance, personal resilience remains underdeveloped. Standing alone activates dormant psychological skills. You learn to manage fear, disappointment, and doubt independently. Each challenge handled alone increases emotional endurance. External support can unintentionally buffer the consequences of poor decisions. When that buffer is removed, cause and effect become clearer. This clarity accelerates learning. You become more attentive to your actions because outcomes are no longer softened by rescue. Responsibility sharpens awareness, and awareness promotes growth. Emotionally, the disappearance of support exposes unmet needs. You begin to recognize where you sought validation instead of self-approval, or comfort instead of self-regulation. This awareness is uncomfortable but necessary. Growth requires identifying gaps, not pretending they don't exist. Once identified, these gaps become areas for development rather than sources of shame. The lack of external support also restructures relationships. You stop seeking connection out of fear and start valuing connection based on mutual respect. Desperation fades when survival is no longer outsourced. This leads to healthier boundaries and more balanced interactions. You engage by choice, not by need. Psychologically, people who grow without support develop a strong sense of internal security. They trust their ability to cope, even when outcomes are uncertain. This trust reduces anxiety and increases confidence. Life becomes less threatening because self-efficacy is established internally rather than borrowed externally. Growth in isolation is rarely visible. There is no applause, feedback, or reassurance. But internally, significant restructuring occurs. Beliefs shift, emotional regulation strengthens, and identity stabilizes. The person emerging from unsupported growth is not louder or harder, but steadier, clearer, and more grounded.